now and where we came from and who's in the room. So, this year, it's been how long since the program started? We started back in 1987, so this is now 25 years since the Worker Education and Training Program has been in existence. And I know there are some people who are new in the room, so courtesy of Mark Catlin, I don't know where he is right now, but courtesy of Mark Catlin, we have a historical backdrop for just a couple minutes to kick off why are we here in the first place. So if we think about when this program started in 1987, really, we started to address the problems that you see on the screen. The hazardous waste that contaminated the soil, air, water. There's Valley of the Drums, Love Canal, probably too many to list off right now. Hazardous materials that spilled during transport or that were handled without adequate safeguards. All of these affecting society as a whole, but also disproportionately affecting poor communities of color. So as a result of the contamination and the disasters that you see on the screen right now, and these are historical clips that Mark Catlin has compiled, we have, in response to this, we had labor, community, environmental justice organizations get together and struggle to make sure that we would have adequate safeguards for worker protection during the cleanup of the environmental mess that you can see on the screen. So what we had in the late 80s then to deal with these problems was the HAZWOPER standard and the origins of the NIHS Worker Education and Training Program. But we had also some very creative, visionary leaders that were running this program, including people in this room today, both from the federal government and from the grantee organizations. So they had, over the years, the vision, the dedication, political savvy, creativity to build on the foundation of the HAZWOPER standard. And so over time, this program has not only been maintained, but expanded and strengthened to include, so that now we have four key components. Number one, we have our core hazardous waste cleanup operations program. And then in the 1990s, that program expanded to include DOE, which is represented in the room, and it also expanded to include the Minority Worker Training Program to address the issue of disproportionate impact on communities of color and to make sure that those people most affected by the contaminants had access to the cleanup jobs. And then fourth, later in the mid-2000s is when the Hazard Disaster Training Program began. So I know people in this room represent those four components, and in addition to that, we've also heard people talk about stimulus dollars and stimulus funds that were channeled into our programs to expand our curriculum and our training on green buildings, green chemistry, green jobs, weatherization, energy efficiency. So we right now are going to be focusing on bringing together the expertise of people who've been around for a while, and that's what all of you in this room represent, together with the people who are newer to the program. So we have four training directors who are going to be on a panel up here, so if you all can come to the front. And in the meantime, just to get a sense of who's in the room, let's look at who has been here since the very, 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 very beginning. 1987, writing those original grant proposals. If you could stand up. Stand up, Carol. Who else?
Carol, that's great.
Anybody else? Okay, round of applause. Who came on board in the early 90s, let's say before 1995, and were some of the early people involved in implementing the grant proposals that these people wrote? Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Great. There's Sandy, and who came on in the second half of the 90s, like 1995 to 1999? Say Sandy, all of you. Okay, who else came on board? Just a couple people. And then how about in the next decade, between 2000 and 2010?
Oh, sure.
A lot of you are still sitting. Okay, so who came on in this last grant round? 2000 to 2015.
Just stand up. Oh, you should be standing.
I would just say everybody in this room should be standing by now.
Moffat, you go way back. You go way back.
You're supposed to stand up when you start with the program. Jim Remington. Okay.
Jim Remington.
So it looks like we have a very few people who were here since the very, very beginning. And then we've added people slowly. And since you all weren't quite following the directions, it's hard to say when everybody came on board. But I think there was a big chunk of people just in the last decade. So together, the people with the experience and the people who are new to the program are both maintaining and expanding and creating stronger programs. And what we're going to hear from right now are 4 of the leaders from different grantees who represent different segments of the population that we serve through this program. So we have Ronnie Westmoreland, who came on board in 1993, and he is the training director of the United Steelworkers Tony Mazzocchi Center. Next after Ronnie is Don Ebony. Ebony couldn't remember exactly when she came on. She's been having so much fun. So Ebony came on in 1997. We decided that. And she's assistant director for operation and training at Dillard University Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. Next, Don Ellenberger came on in 1999. He is the training director for CPWR, the Center for Construction Research and Training. And Jim Ridley up here is the latest on board, and he is the director of Hazmat Training and Weapons of Mass Destruction, which I always want to call Workers' Memorial Day, at the International Association of Firefighters. So we know that our program did not appear just by magic, and we saw the mess that was created, that this was in response to. People worked really long and hard to create this program, to maintain it and to sustain it, and are also thinking about, now that we're 25 years in, how do we go on into the next period of time? So just starting back here, we want to say, I want to ask people up here, where were you maybe 10, 20 or so or more years ago? And how did you get into this work? Ronnie, you came on first, so let's start with you.
You know, about 93, I had been working at Oak Ridge. Well, I was at Oak Ridge. A lot of people say I wasn't working, but I was at Oak Ridge at K25, and I had been employed there for 26 years. And it was getting pretty boring, to tell you the truth, as a maintenance mechanic. And one day I was walking around. My wife had told me, she says, and she tells me a lot. And I listen sometimes. So I listened to this, and she said, you need to have something that you have a passion for. We're involved in our church. You have a passion for doing drama. You have a passion for this and that. What do you have a passion for at work? And I said, well, like 3:30 is my passion. And so I was walking through the plant, and the union president walked by, and I said, I need something to do. And he said, well, we've got this program that's starting, a worker trainer thing, And he said, you might want to try that. And I said, well, yeah, you think? And he said, well, you probably get to make one trip a year and do a class every once in a while. I said, that's better than I've got now, and I'll take that. And so we started doing hazmat classes, and I saw people's eyes start lighting up because they had been seeing the employer do hazmat training for many, many years. And I had seen it also, and you see the same thing every year. Okay? For I don't know how many years. But we started doing the training, and people's eyes started opening, and they said, I didn't realize that we were not making all the mistakes, that we could really fix the workplace. And we started doing the training, and they said, we didn't know you could do this standard training and change it every year, and we started changing it every year. And so I started doing the worker training thing, and they said, you know, we need somebody to help with the evaluation. I said, me. They said, we need somebody to help write curriculum. I said, me, you know, whatever, pick me, you know, like Mr. Cotter, you remember? Pick me, hey, Mr. Cotter, yeah, pick me. And so Joe Anderson was our health and safety director back then, and he believed in worker involvement big time, and he still does. And so we had a curriculum team, and so I had been volunteering for everything for 5 years, and they had an opening come up on the team. They said, this guy volunteers for everything. And so they asked me to serve on the full-time curriculum team. I started doing that. A few years later, you know, we merged with PACE, and then we merged with Steelworkers. I started coordinating all the curriculum, and a couple of years ago they asked me to be the training director. So that's how I got here.
Yeah. All right. All right.
You started as a sheet metal worker.
I did, as a matter of fact. And I share something with Ronnie, and that's the 330 thing. I was working as a sheet metal worker and a foreman in Santa Clara County, putting in ducting systems for clean rooms at for the chip manufacturing plants at that time. And like a lot of us who carry bags of tools around, any excuse you could find not to have to do that is still, was something you really look forward to. And so I actually went to school while I was working with the tools. I went to San Jose State at night and got a master's degree in education. So that was kind of the beginning of my exit out of having to carry tools around every day for a living. So I've done a lot of different things. I've worked internationally for the AFL-CIO abroad, developing training programs. And I worked for a period of 3 years at the Laborers International Union of North America. And that's actually where I was exposed to the hazardous waste training program. They had an international affairs department there that they were very interested in trying to promote this type of training abroad. And so that was my first exposure to that. And I was fortunate enough to visit some of their outstanding training centers around the country. And so I had some other stints with the AFL-CIO, but then I was hired in 1999 by the Center for Construction Research and Training. I have to tell you, for those of you who don't know, we say our name is CPWR, and people say, well, how does that go with Center for Construction Research and Training? And it doesn't. And the reason is because that wasn't our first name. Our first name was the Center to Protect Workers' Rights, CPWR. That was the genesis of our program. In 1990, CPWR was able to get a grant from NIOSH to begin researching what was killing and injuring construction workers in this country. I'll just say briefly that they found out that the federal government in 1990 was spending about approximately $5 per mine worker in this country to study what was killing miners. A lot of miners die, and it's a hazardous situation. Now let's see, do I do it to my left or your left? And then about $1.40 was being spent for general industry to try and research what was injuring and killing people in general industry. And about 5 cents was being spent to find out what was injuring and killing construction workers. And so at that time, and when we didn't have such a hostile Congress, we were able to get some funds dedicated specifically for the development of a research entity, CPWR, that was channeled through NIOSH. And so that was the beginning, and I think they had 3 employees at that time. And that was called the Center to Protect Workers' Rights. And primarily, the research was done to produce peer-reviewed articles on these issues. And CPWR, since that time, has become a leader in researching. But we got tired of taking calls from disgruntled workers and all over the country who Googled workers' rights because they just got laid off and they weren't in the construction industry. And so we were fielding a lot of calls. And so we decided we had to change our name to more accurately reflect what we do. And so that is the Center for Construction Research and Training, which we do research and training. But we didn't want to lose CPWR, the acronym, because it's a well-known acronym in the industry.
I'm glad you explained that, Don, because I actually know. Understood the rationale. I think you're still there to protect workers.
In 1999, the Carpenters Union, who at that time had the hazardous waste grant with NIHS, decided that they no longer wanted to administer the program, that they would rather not do that. They had a grant that included several other unions, including the roofers, for example, the sheet metal workers, the iron workers, and others. But they, for reasons that they best know themselves, they didn't want to manage that particular grant anymore. And they asked the building trades to take it. CPWR is part of the building trades. And so we took it over in 1999, and I was hired to assist in the delivery of that program. And when we took over the responsibility, then 3 other unions joined the consortium, 2 big ones, the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, large union, and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, another really big union, and then a small union, the Boilermakers. And so we were able to grow that. But we don't have all of the construction unions, and I do want to make note that Barbara McCabe is here from the operating engineers, back here. And so for those of you who don't know what an operating engineer is, those are the individuals that operate these huge, massive machines that prepare the earth for construction, and bulldozers and backhoes and cranes and all of that sort of thing. And they have their own grant. And Chi Chang here with the Teamsters Construction Division also have their own NIHS grant. And finally, Gary Gustafson in the back there with the Liuna Training, and the laborers have their own grant. They should all have been up here. I don't know what we were thinking. But
You're speaking for them.
We will have about 10 minutes at the end for people to add. We're going to focus on 3 key questions, like where do people come from, how did they get into this, what are some unique aspects of your program in terms of maintaining quality programs, and then where do we think we're going in the future. So, and then we'll open it up to the degree.
so could you repeat the question? So I think that's enough to start with. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have 2 people that actually came out of working in the industries that they're now doing training, which I think illustrates a real core component of the NIHS Worker Education Training Program, which is some of the unions, SCIU includes other unions that aren't up here as well, as a core component worker trainers or peer trainers. Kevin Ridley also.
Jim.
We work with Kevin Riley, where are you? I keep messing up. I apologize, Jim. Jim Ridley came out of how many years of experience as a firefighter?
I was a firefighter. I got hired in 1980, and my goal when I got hired as a firefighter was to become the chief of the fire department. I started doing everything that I thought I needed to do to put myself on the track to become an administrator and then become the chief of the department. And then something happened. There was an issue with the union president, and the union president didn't understand the law. He didn't understand the statutes that govern public safety officers in the state of Indiana. And I thought that this would be a field that I could go into, and maybe the sky would be the limit. We used to fight fires. I've got some guys that are also here from the fire department. We used to fight fires, and we never wore masks. We never washed our gear. There were instances where firefighters would their gear, because of all of the particulates on their gear, would almost spontaneously combust because everything would just catch on fire. And it was a badge of honor to have dirty gear and a dirty helmet and not wear a mask. And there was a particular fire where firefighters responded to a chemical fire. A apparatus was on one side. They shot water from one side to the other, and there was a piece of apparatus on the other side. And when the water came through, it took the chrome off the bumper. And all those firefighters that were exposed to the water that went through this building came down with some form of cancer. And my brother was one of those firefighters that came down with a form of cancer. And I thought we need to really aggressively see what we can do to help keep firefighters safe. Got involved with the union, created a health and safety committee, and this health and safety committee began to make sure that the city adhered to the standards that OSHA had out there. And as we began to push this heavy rock up the hill, it was a tough sell to get the city on board, but then the city said, yeah, you're right, we need to figure out how we can keep firefighters safe. I became the vice president of the state organization, and my job down there was to lobby. And during my lobbying efforts, we worked to create laws that protected public safety employees in the state of Indiana, all the way to presumptive illnesses, where we could tie an instance from a fire run that a firefighter made to an illness that this firefighter now had, because everything didn't happen immediately. You know, some of these things were chronic and they happened over time. So we were able to get this presumptive law pushed through in the state of Indiana. OSHA kind of sets the basement, but it's up, I think, to municipalities and to states to make sure that they do things to protect the workers. And that was something that I was very, very passionate about. We have 4 different training programs under NIEHS, trainer programs, mentor observer programs. We have our technician program, and we have our confined space rescue program. So these are all things that are very near and dear to me, along with all of the other training programs that we roll out. But anything that we can do to train and protect workers, you know, I'm for it.
Nice. Beautiful.
Ebony got involved in creating her bio here because she was really interested in blending her interest in the environment, in education, and economic development. And she came on about 1997. How and where were you before that? How and why did you get involved in this?
Well, I can't go quite that far back. I was in high school about 20 years. So I'm going to go about 10 years. I came into this field from a totally different viewpoint from you all. The Minority Worker Training Program is primarily what Dillard University, our program, is known for. And when it began, we focused a lot on the basic skills. And our focus is really to bring in a new population into the field. So whereas your population, they're already working in the field, you want to keep them safe, we're bringing a whole new population, and we're charged with taking this new population and bringing their skill level up to learn how to deal with environmental hazards in a safe way. And so I would like to say that I started from the bottom up. I started out as a graduate assistant, 3 jobs, trying to get it down to 1 job, and I went to Dr. Wright, and I told her I needed a job. I needed a job. So I knew a little bit because I had worked for a year or so with Dr. Wright as a graduate assistant. And then I graduated, and then she assigned me to the Minority Worker Training Program. And it became a really good fit. It became more than a job for me because I was excited. I wanted to know how we could grow this program. And again, we started with basic skills. We weren't necessarily doing the technical training. We had a relationship with the Laborers Agency, and they pretty much completed our technical training for us. So what we primarily focused on was developing our basic skills and how we could add different components. So over time, we may have started with a basic curriculum, but we improved it, we added different components, and then it became a point where NIEHS kept just pushing us and said, you can't stay still, you gotta keep moving, you gotta keep growing. And so that push turned into us actually developing our own education and training institute. And that's when we started developing out, well, not really developing, because why reinvent the wheel? The Laborers Agency and all of you have all, IAFF have all this curriculum out, why not just use it? So we just used it. So we were able to use the curriculum that was available through the web page, the W web page, curriculum, what is that? Clearinghouse curriculum. Curriculum catalog, to use that basic curriculum and bring in some of our trainings that we have locally to use that to deliver the technical training. So over time, we've actually developed our own technical training component within New Orleans, within our consortium.
Nice.
Ebony is the newest person up here, but I want to thank her too because we are even newer in our consortium in terms of the Minority Worker Training Program. So she has generously invited Samantha, who runs our program, the Minority Worker Training Program, to come and learn from her experiences there. And that, I think, is the essence of this Trainers Exchange. It's what we want to do. It's what we want to share our experiences in our training. So everybody up here represents slightly different occupations and interests. We've got building trades, we've got industrial workers, refineries, specifically firefighters, and then workers who are wanting to get into the workforce. But we also have a sort of common denominator that everybody in this room is here because we're really interested and invested in high quality, effective training. So I'd like to ask people up here at the table. Oh, in fact, I wanted to mention the minimum criteria document. For those of you who are newer in the room, we did go through a series of meetings and years to hash out what is our minimum criteria for effective training. And that is something that you will hear sometimes in terms of, are we meeting the minimum criteria for effective training? That's what binds us all together. So I want to try to make that minimum criteria document a little bit real and ask people at the table how you go about making your training relevant to the workers that you train, providing them with skills, knowledge, power to make workplace changes. So what are some examples of whether it needs assessment or how you implement the program, both and to empower workers in the classroom? How do you involve workers in developing and implementing and evaluating programs? Maybe changes over time that you've had to make. So it's an open question. Ronnie, you specifically mentioned worker involvement, and your own story illustrates that. So how, as a training director, have you involved workers both as trainers but also involved workers in your classes and your programs so that they can make changes in the
Well,
work?
it's not my initiative, and I didn't start it, but I've continued things that Joe started, and Paul Renner, and now Jim Frederick, and those folks. But I continue those things that we use workers as part of developing training. And what we do is we make sure that when we use experts and we do research and we put these things together, you know, it looks good to us, but we're separated from the workplace by, some of us, by a lot of years. And when we show that to the worker, they say it looks great, except it doesn't work. You know, it's really good stuff, but we can't do it at our workplace because, and they give us all these reasons that it doesn't work with us. So instead of developing it and then trying to use it, we bring them in the development process, and they're part of the process, and we develop curriculum, and we weave in all of these barriers that the workers said that they're going to face. Therefore, the people in the classroom, the workers, are the center of solving those problems when they come and take the class. Example, you know, we put in a story like, when I was working, when I was employed back at Oak Ridge, there was one day when I had this long extension pulling on a socket, and the socket was yay big, and the big nut there, you know, and I was pulling on it, and the socket actually split open. I fell backward, you know, and I hit the pavement, and it wasn't good, you know, it hurt. But I was a little younger in those days, so now I would lay there. You know, they'd carry me off. But I got up and I was all right for a while. And then by Monday morning, I called in. I said, you know, I can't walk. And they said, well, you know, that's bad, but you need to be here. Just get to the dispensary somehow. They said, yeah, just get in somehow. And so I got into the dispensary, and they said, oh, this is not good. You need to go to a specialist. They sent me a specialist. He sent me home, and I was off for 6 weeks.
Jesus.
Before I could go back to work. When I came back to work, you know, I drove in, and I looked at the sign there where it had all the days that we had worked without a lost time. I said, oh man, I messed that thing up. But I didn't. It was just like it was. We'd added more days to that. That hurt me pretty bad, you know. And I asked the doctor there. He said, oh, you were off for your comfort. I said, for my comfort? I couldn't walk. And so I said, that sign doesn't mean much out in front of our plant. Another time I was working on this big saw in the shop, and it had a big platform here, you lay stuff on it, and then the fan runs, and you can kind of measure out and cut off pieces of metal, and we call it angle iron, I think it's angle steel or whatever it is, and it was like 20 feet long, so I laid it up there, and I went out there and put this little stand out there with a roller on it, so lay the end of it on there, and then I started cutting off little pieces, kept cutting, and I pulled it off that little stand out there. And this end just flew straight up, and of course, and got my thumb and caught it in the saw, and it was ugly, and it had a couple of stitches in there. And so when of course, that didn't. That's the first sign. And so they came out there and they said, "What should we do?" Well, I said, "Why don't we just add to this saw a big long extension thing goes up there and fixes this problem?" And they did that time. They were fixing the hazard. The other time when I broke the socket, they just said, you're not supposed to be pulling on this. So you're supposed to be pushing on it. You're not standing exactly right, I don't think. You're standing exactly right, So what do you do? As steelworkers, we've been attacking this problem for, Jim says, at least 20 years they did, and we were trying to attack it. And it's a behavior-based programs out there that, what if that sign out in front of the plant said, employees have reported 121 hazards this year, and we have fixed 121 hazards this year. That would mean something. Instead of trying to hide the injuries because, if I'm working with my buddy here and it's 2 more days till he gets a $100 gift certificate, and I put my finger in that saw, I get it under my arm and I run, I've got to go hide somewhere. So, as long as these programs focus on worker behavior and they don't focus on fixing the problems, then we've got, and the steel workers now, we've got this new focus, and it's backed by the executive committee, and it's stop the BS, behavior programs. And just one new thing about it is that behavior programs are going to be identified as hazards. If you have a behavior program, you have got a hazard. Things like that invigorate our trainers. They say, at least we're working on our problem. Thank you. You're working on our problem. So we build curriculum around that. We bring workers in. They help us do these things. And we put together campaigns that involve training.
Wow.
Many years ago, we used to work for SEIU as the health and safety person on the West Coast. We actually did a flyer at one point that said, "Is your employer's health and safety program hazardous to your health?" Because they did have these kinds of bonuses and incentives that did nothing about the hazards and just discouraged people from reporting and getting the adequate treatment that they need. Thank you for sharing that story. Jim, I know that you have a program of peer